Pikmin 2 is the sequel to Pikmin, an original first-party developed title from Nintendo that was released in 2001, shortly after the GameCube launch. The original game was met with a positive response here and in Japan, thanks to its very unique gameplay and photorealistic graphics that sort of made a whole new world out of your garden. For the sequel, Nintendo has gone back to the drawing board and kind of addressed some of the criticisms that were leveled at the original game, which, as cool as it was actually pretty short. You could probably finish it in about a weekend. So for Pikmin 2, Nintendo's gone back to the drawing board and improved just about every aspect of the game, and the end result is a sequel that's better in almost every way than its predecessor. For those of you unfamiliar with the Pikmin franchise, you'll take the role of Captain Olimar, a tiny space adventurer who, when we last saw him, was seen escaping a planet that he'd crash-landed on. As luck would have it, he was able to reconstruct his ship and escape before his life support system failed, with the help of these small alien creatures that he called Pikmin because they reminded him of a brand of carrot back on his homeworld. Well, when Pikmin 2 starts, we are pretty much catching up with Olimar just as he's leaving the planet and arriving home. And unfortunately, the news is not so good when he gets there. Turns out that the shipping company that he worked for has gone into some pretty major debt. His ship is repossessed, and he's pretty much forced to save the day by going back to the planet of the Pikmin and collecting all the sorts of cool junk that's lying around it. Because apparently he can sell that for a great deal of money back home, which is exactly what his company needs. They're in debt for 10,000 Pokos, which is pretty intense. So Olimar is dispatched back to the Pikmin planet with an assistant Louie who, once you sort of look him over, you get the distinct impression that he's not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but that's cool. He's also joined by a ship that has sort of an unnatural attraction to material goods, which turns out to be pretty handy as he's going about his business collecting all the stuff. Now, the addition of an assistant kind of segues very nicely into the game's revamped gameplay, which focuses a lot on multitasking. As a matter of fact, if you finish the original Pikmin, you might remember that the very last level was pretty intense because you're required to keep track of the different sets of Pikmin that you controlled and kind of get them through an obstacle course. Well, imagine an entire game of that, because pretty much that's what you're looking at in Pikmin 2. Multitasking is the order of the day. You will definitely need Louie quite a bit. You're able to split him from Captain Olimar, and they can each lead individual groups of Pikmin, and you can have them sort of coordinate with each other. In some cases, you can move Louie to a platform that's maybe higher than where you are, and then you can have Olimar throw Pikmin up there that he can then sort of take and use for whatever he needs to do. That level of multitasking is pretty common, and it kind of gets introduced really quickly in the game, which starts out sort of as what you'd expect, which is kind of a reintroduction, playable tutorial of the basic mechanics of the game, and then heads off into a much more complicated direction that ends up being a lot more challenging and a lot more fun. Now, besides the kind of revamped play mechanics, what you're also going to be having to keep track of are even more Pikmin to control. The red, yellow, and blue Pikmin are back from the original game. This time they've sort of been specialized a little bit more. The red are resistant to fire, as we know. They're really good attackers. The blue are resistant to water and are the only breed that can actually go underwater and do their business. And the yellow are kind of electric this time out, which adds a certain level of strategy because you're going to find areas where you'll need a certain type of Pikmin, and the challenge will be how do you get them there and how do you use them best. But in addition to those, you're also going to find white Pikmin and purple Pikmin. Now these are a little bit different in that whereas the other kinds of Pikmin come out of these sort of maracas with feet that you see early on, these pods, the white and purple Pikmin actually come out of flowers, and you create them by throwing any color Pikmin into specific flowers that the Pikmin are then eaten and then shot out as these new types of Pikmin. The two new breeds of Pikmin add a definite sense of resource management, as you're only able to get them in very specific locations, as opposed to the garden variety Pikmin that you can pretty much get anywhere you like, because where there's an item or a creature to kill that can be recycled, you'll have Pikmin. Now, in addition to the Pikmin kind of being enhanced for this outing, Olimar and Louie have actually been buffed up some as well. Each character has access to a type of potion that can be mixed by collecting berries that you find in the game. The potions will either supercharge your Pikmin and increase their attack power and speed, or, one of the more useful ones, actually freeze an enemy by turning them to stone, which is pretty much a godsend for some of the later boss fights, when you can actually freeze the boss, because if you're going to find some situations where there's a lot of mayhem, and successfully getting those off is going to be a little tough. So you can probably plan on a couple deaths. Because yes, death is back in Pikmin 2. You will find that you probably shouldn't get attached to anyone, because you're going to lose a lot of your little Pikmin, be it to natural causes or just getting squashed. There's some trial and error in this, a little bit more than in the previous game. And you're going to find that when you get it right, everything's going to go perfectly and you're not going to break a sweat. But when it goes wrong, things are going to be horrible and you can expect to lose Pikmin in the dozens. So if you don't like hearing little screams and seeing little ghosts, you're probably going to want to be really careful. Now, as far as the game structure goes, Pikmin 2 follows roughly the same kind of map that was laid out by the original game. You're going to